Hello, and thanks once again for clicking into another edition of Sit Down with Ed Brown. Today, we are lucky to be joined by a man who has had several encounters and has done a great job of documenting all of his encounters, as well as documenting all the evidence he's collected. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Randy Harrington. How are you doing today, Randy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Hey, we appreciate you coming on the show. Hey, I got to ask, and I asked everybody this right off the bat, how did you get interested in the whole Bigfoot subject in the first place?
Well, when I was a kid, I was pretty much a loner, and I read a lot, and I still read a lot. But I was pretty much going through every book in the library in my junior high year, and I was I went through different phases, and I was in a phase where I was reading nothing but animal books, anything I could find on animals, and I happened to come across a Roger Patterson book in my school library that I read, and once I read it, I was hooked.
Well, Patterson, I mean, obviously he's a legend in the industry. Do you remember what the name of the book was by any chance?
I think there's Monsters Among Us or something to that effect.
Right. Well, we'll make sure we'll see if we can't locate that book and maybe put it across the screen for our viewers. Now you've had a lot of encounters. Can you tell us about your first encounter and how did it start?
Well, I mean, as you know, Ed, we spoke a little bit. I've been actively researching since 2003, and that is boots on the ground in the woods since 2003. Even though I'd spent several years before that educating myself, reading Bigfoot reports and sighting reports, and trying to glean all the information I could about this animal and the behavior patterns, and trying to put together in my head any type of patterns before I actually started researching. And I've never been a hunter. I've never hunted, and I was never a camper. So all of those things were green to me. So I went into it with basically a clean slate. In 2003, when I started camping and going down to the Kiamichi Mountains of Oklahoma, I didn't know a thing. It was learn as I went, and learn I did.
That's awesome. And your first experience was, what year was your first encounter?
I had several small incidents that happened throughout a couple of years, from 2003 all the way up into the fall of 2005, all centered around the Kiamichi Mountains. And in the fall of 2005, we caught one on video, me and another fellow. We call it the Ridgewalker video. You can look it up on YouTube. But it was shortly after that, in February of the following year, in 2006, that I went for the first time to the Chickasaw National Park south of Sulphur, Oklahoma. And I went there because of the partner that I had joined up with in the Kiamichis told me that he had researched in the park and that there were other people researching in the park and that they were seeing them in the park quite a bit. So going on that information, I went to the park in February of 2006, and he had told me a couple of reports of people coming back to their campsites, after being out late at night or going to a movie in Davis or some other small town and coming back and having something running from their campsite. So I took that to heart. I thought to myself, okay, these things will go into a campsite if it's empty. So my plan was, at the time, to set up a campsite and make it appear to be empty. And my plan was, I had a video recorder, and you can laugh all you want, but when the time came to use it, I was not going to reveal my hiding spot for nothing. But and you'll understand why as the listeners hear, the fear I actually went through at the time it was happening. But anyways, so at the beginning, I went into the campsite. I found my way to campsite number 30 in Rock Creek, which runs alongside Rock Creek, and that runs into Arbuckle Lake. High activity area, lots of sighting reports out of that area. Now, you got to remember, back then, there was a lot of cedar trees in there, a lot of ground cover. You could hardly see from one campsite to the next. And I was there in the off-season. My goal was to go there in the off-season, to be the only person there, and that would increase my chances of being visited if something wanted to visit the campsite. And lo and behold, that all worked out to my advantage that night. I pulled in. There was no camp host there. It was closed down. I wound my way around Rock Creek, and I found campsite 30, and that's where I set up. It's a one-way park. You can only drive in one way. And so I parked my vehicle with the campsite on my right side of the vehicle, and the rear of my truck was pointing towards Rock Creek. And there was a little stretch of woods between me and another campsite, and then more woods and Rock Creek. So, there's a pretty good distance behind my truck. But I was told by my friend that they did all of their research out of campsite 30 and pretty much had it already established from that campsite. So, to make a long story short, I went in, found my spot, set up a tent, set up a table full of food. I had bought some melons, a package of melons that had cantaloupes and watermelons and other types of melons all cut up into a styrofoam package that all I did was just open it up and it was on the table. And some other foods. I put some apples and some other things on the table. And I think it was about 7 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, something like that. And I went into town. It's very close to Sulphur. I mean, it is just a stone's throw. As a matter of fact, this campsite is only about 100 to 200 yards away from the very edge of town, which is an old folks' home. There's an old folks' home right next to the park. And so it's amazing how close to town this really was. Sure. And so anyway, so I go into town, and I go to Sonic, and I get me some food, and I come back, and when I get to the camp host part of the park, which is the very top end of the park, before I pulled back to my campsite, I had brought blankets and some duct tape, and I taped blankets all up into every window of my truck. I have a crew cab F-250 diesel truck with racks on the back, and I taped up blankets through all of my windows, and the openings that I had was right in front of the steering wheel and right to my driver's side, so I could open it up and look out my driver's window and right straight through the front. My goal was, and I tried to stick with my goal was that if a Bigfoot came around, I was never going to get out of my truck. I was just going to film through my windshield. If it would step to the front of my truck, all I would do is just hit my headlights. That was my plan, to just hit. I figured a Bigfoot, if it was going to come snooping around my campsite, it would eventually end up in front of my truck somehow. And I would just hit my headlights and film it through the windshield. That was my plan. Sure. Well, anyway, so I pulled into my campsite with all these blankets all taped up, and I'm looking through the crack. I had it opened up right over my steering wheel, and I drive into my parking spot, and I never even get out of the truck. I close up the blankets. I'm sitting in my truck, and I'm eating my food. I had already put my parabolic microphone on top of my truck, and I'd run the cord down through the driver's door, and I have a headset. So I'm sitting in my truck, got the headset on, eating my food, just knowing that I'm in for a long night, because most of my research at that point had been by myself, a few times with a friend, most of the time by myself. And when you're by yourself, you spend a lot of time just being quiet and getting in the tent and just hunkering down and waiting to see what happens. And that was my plan for this night. So I'm in the truck, and I'm listening to a parabolic. I finish my food up. I'm sitting there. I kick my seat back a little bit, and I'm just kind of laying there in a reclined position. And it starts to get 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and it was, I think, February 2nd or February something. So it really didn't take long to get completely dark. I mean, dark comes early that time of year. So I'm in my truck. It's well after dark. I mean, I'm just going to guess the time frame is 9, maybe 10 o'clock. And if anybody who has listened with a parabolic mic knows that you easily get drawn into the cadence of nighttime sounds. For myself there, I could hear water flowing in the Rock Creek. I could hear the wind blowing. The wind was blowing pretty good. There was pretty good gusts going every now and again. So there was just a cadence to the nighttime sound, and you get used to it, especially if you listen to it for an hour or two. And so that's what I was listening to, and I was actually easing back and kind of drifting off because, that's just what it does to you when you're listening to those kind of sounds. Sure. But the moment that there's something out of place, you recognize it immediately. And only somebody that's got a parabolic and has done this knows what I'm talking about. You will notice immediately when there's something that you need to pay attention to. And that's what happened to me. It must have been about 9, 10 o'clock, and I heard something walking through leaves. I heard, step, 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 crunch, crunch, crunch through leaves, dead leaves. And so I started paying attention. And then I'm listening some more, and I hear what sounds like a stick being dragged through gravel. And in my mind, I'm not seeing this. I'm only hearing it. So I'm having to put the picture together in my head what's happening at this point. I hear a stick being dragged through gravel. And that makes a distinct sound. There's hardly anything that you're going to misinterpret as a stick being dragged through gravel. And there was gravel trails, gravel paths that separated each one of these campsites and would lead them to the bathroom and all this kind of stuff. So I would hear this thing walking through the leaves, and every time it would cross a gravel pathway, I would hear the stick dragging through the gravel. And then once it got through the gravel, it would go back to just stepping through leaves. So it made this sound that was very clear what was happening. And then every once in a while, the whole park is just completely littered with trash cans. Back then, it was just the metal trash cans with lids. And I think sometimes they would use cinder blocks to keep the tops on them. But I believe this creature was in the part of the park that was gated off and locked. So it was going through the park, and I heard it picking up trash can lids and putting them back on. That's a big difference, because I've been back to that park many, many, many times. I've heard raccoons taking those lids off, and I'd hear them hit the ground and roll like a quarter. And so the difference of when one is being knocked to the ground by a smaller animal, but a distinct sound is when one is being put back on. And it was clear. There was something checking out the trash can and putting the lids back on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it could have been a person at this point. I just didn't know. So I'm listening, and then for the first time, after I heard a couple of trash can lids being looked into and put back on, I heard the first metal post being hit. And I'm assuming the stick that it was dragging around, it still had it in its hand and was hitting one of the metal lantern posts. And the reason I'm assuming it was the metal lantern post is because I hear another post being hit about 4, 5, 6 seconds, which tells me there's a cadence of it walking through the park, tapping these metal lantern posts at certain intervals. So it's easy to put the picture together when you're hearing all this. So I'm hearing these metal posts being tapped on as it goes by with a stick, and then it would find another trash can, lift it up, pop the lid back on, and it's meandering through the whole park. I don't know where it's at. I just know I can hear it. So I don't know what path it's taking. I just know that it's going through the park. But then after a while, it could have been 30, 40, 50 minutes, I don't know. But after a while, for the first time from the beginning of me hearing this thing walking through the park, all of a sudden it stops. And it had never stopped through this whole process, but all of a sudden I hear it stop. And I start getting a little edgy because I'm thinking to myself, it's got to see my campsite. That's the only reason it has stopped. It has got to see that I'm here. And I start getting a little nervous, and I've got my parabolic pointed behind my truck. I don't have the parabolic dish on it. I just have the microphone sitting up there so I can hear all the way around my truck. And but still, I'm thinking it's got to be behind my truck. And the only reason I was thinking that is because behind my truck is where Rock Creek was, and my partner told me, he said that a lot of times they'll come up Rock Creek. So anyways, I parted the blankets on my driver's side, and I'm looking in my side mirror, trying to look into my side mirror down the driver's side of my truck, behind my truck. And on the F-250s, they had the big mirrors on the side. So I had a really good clear view. There was a full moon that night. It was very bright. And you could easily walk without a flashlight. I mean, it was that bright. And so I'm just looking into the woods behind my truck thinking he's got to be back there somewhere. And at some point I hear my first and only wood knock where he clearly hits a tree. Pow! Crack, hits a tree. And I'm thinking, what's changed? What's that all about? And I hear the creek sloshing. I hear something sloshing through the creek. Rock Creek is probably about 30 to 40 feet wide, knee-deep in some places, waist-deep in others, but it's crystal clear spring water. Something was crossing that creek. And at this point, I still had not seen either of the creatures. But at that point, I had only been dealing with listening to one. There was only one creature in the park. I'm studying the area behind my truck, and occasionally I would see a shadowy movement in the woods behind my truck. And so that's what I was concentrating on. I was like, there's something back there. I mean, something's back there. And that's the first time I saw the full view of whatever this creature was. It had put its hands on the side of the tree and stepped out from around the tree and looked into my campsite, which I was looking right at him. And it looked like a person. It looked like a person looking out from around the tree with both hands touching the tree, pushing off the tree to look, and then pulled itself back in behind the tree.
Wow.
That's what it looked like. And then my heart really starts beating. I was like, man, I said, this is happening. I said, it is on. They're here. They're interested in my campsite. I mean, this is working out better than I had ever. I mean, it's going to happen. This is the night, is what I was thinking to myself.
Sure.
And at that point, somewhere shortly after that point, I hear my first vocalization, and it was an owl call. It was a loud hoot. It went, hoo, hoo. And he started doing them at like 5-second intervals, 5 or 6 second intervals. And it just kept coming and kept coming. Eventually, there was like 17 of them in about a 3-minute period, just constantly coming. And they seemed to be getting louder and louder. I thought the creature must have started, in the distance and was coming up, behind, I don't know. But apparently, it was just getting louder and louder each time it was doing them, because we eventually had the sounds put onto a spectrogram. Steve Coles did it for me, and you could actually see from the spectrogram that it was getting louder and louder, more voluminous each time. So it was either on the move or it was just getting louder each time. We also compared the sound to all of the native owls to that area, and the only one that it was even close to was the short-eared wood owl, and it was still different. We've had naturalists look at these audios. We've had 3 different naturalists look at it and not tell them what we thought it was or what I saw that night. We just wanted their opinion on these calls. And one of them said, this is somebody pretending to be an owl. And one of them said, there's no way an owl would do that many calls in a row. He said they only do 3 or 4 calls, and then they go into some other type of mating call or territorial call. Never will they do 17 in a row. But this one did, and I got it recorded.
Wow.
So it was shortly after that they broke free. And this is the only time that I saw 2 of them. The big one, and I didn't know till he got to my truck just how big he was. Because when I saw him, he'd come out from the wood line, and he was hunched over, and his arms were swinging, and his arms were probably only about a foot off the ground. I mean, he was that low. He could have easily went into 4x4 mode if he wanted to. And I'm assuming that's why he was crouched down, because, he wanted to be close to the ground if he needed to go into 4x4 mode. So he was hunched over, his arms were swinging, and he was moving at a pretty good clip to try to get. It's almost like he was racing to get to the back corner of my truck. And the little one was staying on his right flank, right behind him, and I saw them bumping into each other as they were both running for the same spot. They were clamoring, bumping, and to get to the same spot. When they got to the back corner of my truck, he stopped and he grabbed my racks, put one hand on the side post and the other one on the cross beam at the back of my racks, and he stood up full height, and he was a full neck and head taller than my racks. And later, I measured those racks. I mean, I was very fortunate to have him standing right by something that I could get a size reference off of. Sure. And so the next day, I actually measured my racks, and from the ground to the top of those racks were 7 foot exactly. He was a neck and head taller than 7 foot. And he looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, muscular, with hair. I saw his hands wrap around the side post. I saw the moonlight coming through the hair on his shoulders, big coconut shoulders, and I saw the V-shaped torso with the light coming through under his arm and the muscle going down from his armpit to his waist in a very muscular V shape. The little one moved in behind the tailgate, and I never saw the little one again. Matter of fact, I never saw the big one again, because the moment he stepped around the side of my truck, I thought he was coming down the driver's side, and I was in a panic mode that you would not believe. The moment I thought he was coming down that side of my truck doors weren't locked, and I was beside myself. I let my blankets close. I mean, I panicked like you wouldn't. I can't even tell you the panic that you're going to go through when something this size, you think it's coming down to the door of your truck. I mean, I thought it was going to try to look in the window. I mean, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I kind of rolled off to the side. I was behind my A post, but I kind of rolled over onto the side. Even though I didn't even close the blanket with my hand. I let them fall closed because I wanted it to look natural. I did not want him to know I was in there. And I rolled over to the side and was kind of hunkered down. And my heart was beating so hard, it was boom, 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 like I just ran a marathon. And even that scared me because I was thinking to myself, man, he is hanging on to the racks in my truck. He's going to feel my heartbeat thumping through the metal of those racks because I felt like I was moving my whole seat with my heartbeat. And so I pulled my back off the seat of the truck because I just did not want him to know I was there at all. I couldn't. I mean, that's the kind of panic that you go through. And so, you know, when you get people saying that, you know, they felt this and they felt that and they felt threatened, I'm telling you, your body can make you feel all kinds of things when it's in fight or flight.
Sure.
And I was going through that. But my saving grace at that moment was my truck immediately squatted, and he climbed up on my truck, and my truck it squatted. It was a brand new truck at the time. You know, it wasn't brand new, but it was really new. I mean, the shocks were still stiff, the springs were still stiff, but this thing squatted the back end of my truck like a toad. I mean, it squatted down. And what's crazy is you would think that would scare you too. And it did worry me because I was thinking, I thought he was in the back of my truck. I said, he is in the back of my truck. He is in the back of my truck. And I thought, what am I going to do if he climbs up on the top of my cab? I said, the cab is going to cave in.
Right.
But fortunately for me, after the investigation that I did the next morning and everything, he never was in the bed of my truck. He was only on the bumper. There was 2 dirty, dusty smudge marks on my bumper. I mean, they were at each end of the bumper, which means he was standing with he was big. And so I'm assuming when I heard him rummaging through the stuff in the back of my truck that he must have been doing it over the top of my racks because of how big he was. He had to have been standing on my bumper and just reached over the top of my racks, and he was rummaging through my stuff. I mean, my generator got turned over. I had Tupperware containers full of camping supplies back there and all kinds of stuff. But the one thing that ended up catching their attention was in the back corner of my truck, I had 2 little green 1-pound propane tanks. And he accidentally tapped those together while he was jostling stuff around, and you could hear him going, clink, and he stopped. Everything that they were doing at that moment stopped. And then I heard clink, 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 like they were toying with them, like they enjoyed the sound that it made or whatever. Now, that'll come up later, but, you know, eventually they stopped making a noise back there, and I'm still kind of in a panic mode in the front of my truck, thinking they're still going to show up in the front of my truck, they're going to walk away in the front of my truck, and I'm going to get them on video. I had my video camera, man, I was ready, but they eventually just kind of moved off, and I didn't hear anything. But I still thought that they were around, so I still wasn't going to give up my position. I wasn't going to move in the truck. I wasn't going to do anything. And then I started hearing the metal, what I thought was the metal post, lantern post being tapped with the stick again. The same sound that I heard when the single one was approaching earlier was tapping the metal lantern post. So I'm assuming it was the same thing. But in the morning when I got out of my truck and started looking around for evidence, I saw that my 2 green tanks were gone. So that may not have been the metal lantern posts that I heard being tapped, but it might have been the little green tanks being clanked together as they were walking away.
If they found them some toys.
Yeah, exactly. So So that's pretty much what happened with the big one and the little one. But about an hour or so later, I'm sitting there, and I start hearing noises. Now, this second approach, I never saw a thing. And I was only lucky when I saw the big male and the little one on the first approach, or I would only have sounds to tell you about. Fortunately, I had a sighting that we could give an answer to the sounds I heard. But this second time, something approached. I never saw anything, so I can't say for sure it was a Bigfoot. But I'll tell you what it sounded like, and then the evidence that I found the next morning. Okay. This next approach was probably at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I heard something coming. It sounded like maybe it was coming down the creek. I just don't know. And every so often I would hear this small temper tantrum. It was like it was almost, and about every 15 seconds, 20 seconds, I would hear this little temper tantrum. And it sounded like it was getting closer and closer. Now, the evidence that I found the next morning around my food table would indicate to me that maybe it was an adult female and a youngster, because I eventually heard whatever it was make its way to my fruit table. And in my mind, I'm still hoping that whatever is there will come to the front of my truck and I will just get it in my headlights. I mean, that was really the simplest plan that I had, and I didn't want to ruin anything, so I had to wait it out. And I thought to myself, this is why everybody has failed, because they don't stick to their plan. And right. So my goal was to just stick to my plan, no matter how hard it was to stay with my plan. Well, anyway, so they're at the table, and when they're eating, I can hear them eating the melons. And you know, when you and I eat a peach, you know how you will suck at the same time that you take a bite to keep the juices in your mouth? That's exactly what this thing sounded like. I could hear them sucking at the same time that they bit. And that's a different sound than a raccoon or anything else would make. They just kind of gnaw on things. But this was something with a big enough mouth that it could make a sucking sound as it was eating. And they eventually moved on. Never went to the front of my truck, never left the camp that way. They went back the way they came and blew it for me as far as being able to get them on video. But the next morning, and I sat there till 7 o'clock in the morning, till the first rays of sunlight. I still was not about to open my door. I was not about, because I didn't know if they were still around or whatever. But it's funny how you'll get brave once sunlight starts, showing it, peeking its head over the hills. But as soon as it got sunlight, man, I was out of that truck and I was looking around. It's weird because you can see so much further with sunlight, so you're not as afraid. But right. Man, I was looking on the back of my truck and I saw the dirty smudge marks on the bumper where this thing stood. I was looking on my racks for hairs. I climbed up there and I was looking for fingerprints. I mean, I was looking for anything that I could find. All I found was just dusty smudge marks. And at the table, I went to the table, and I've got pictures. I should have sent you the pictures of the fruit at the table. There was a piece of melon laying there with a half of a moon bite out of one, and it was just laying there where something took a bite out of it and set it back down, and you could see the half moon bite mark, almost the same as a person would leave. And it almost looked like there was dirty handprints on the very side. I had a card table. It was an old card table which had edges, soft edges, and there was an apple that had been rolled all the way to the edge, and looked like two little handprints on the side of the table, and that apple had been, there was no bites taken out of it, but there were teeth marks all the way around it, and no bites taken out of it. Wow. All I could imagine is maybe a female squatch or an adult squatch rolled that apple over, entertained the little one while they were testing out the melon pieces. Right. And that's what it looked like to me.
That's a scary experience. I mean, I couldn't imagine what I would have been going through, what I would have felt being in that situation myself, especially when you think he's going to come down the side of your truck. And I couldn't imagine. Now, do you think they were there in where they were anyway, around the truck, basically just waiting to see if they could arouse anyone in the tent, thinking that, okay, if someone wakes up, then we can run. If no one gets up, then we know we're safe. Is that kind of what you thought they were doing?
Right. Well, the big one positioned himself. I mean, the very first place that he positioned himself put the truck between him and the tent. And before I rolled over thinking he was coming down, I saw him look over the racks towards the tent, almost nervously, like he was ready to duck or whatever. So clearly that was a strategic positioning for them. I mean, if they live around that park, if they come into that park on a regular basis and they raid, food bins or trucks or whatever, I'm certain that they have had plenty of times when somebody has rousted about from their deep sleep in a tent and got up. But most of the time, people that get up in tent, you hear them getting up and zipping up stuff and then unzipping the flap, and then they'll step out. So it gives them plenty of opportunities to skedaddle when they start hearing noises in the tent. So I think they're familiar with our normal behavior when we're trying to come out of the tent. They had no idea I was in the truck, or he would have never positioned himself right there where I could see his full body.
Sure.
That's why it's hard for me to move into the paranormal realm. I also had a firearm, and so there's things. I've had people tell me, if you've got a firearm, or if you're, they know when you have a gun, and they know this, and and all this. I don't buy it. I can't buy it because of what happened to me. They did not know I was in the truck. The fear that I felt was brought on by my own physiology. It wasn't put in my head by this animal's paranormal ability. It was me being afraid and getting super flighty in the cab of that truck. So that's why I try to stay completely logical to what happened that night, and nothing out of the ordinary supernatural happened.
Right. Now, you talked about you were in a campsite per se. Were there any other campers anywhere close?
No.
So was there any other activity going on? Nothing like that?
There was no. I was the only one in the whole. There's like 120 campsites throughout that whole creek area, going up the hill all the way to Veterans Lake, and I was the only one there.
Now, one other thing you mentioned, and I'm just curious about this here because you're obviously a great researcher, but you mentioned that there's an old folks home that's not very far away. Have you ever gone to the old folks home and asked anyone if they've ever seen anything or heard anything?
Yep.
And what happened there?
I have researched so much about that park. I have talked to people that work at the nature center there. I've only gotten one worker there to say, even close. He said that he's got friends who claims to have seen him in the park, and that's all that he would admit to. One time I was there, I was down in Rock Creek. I was looking for footprints, and I was checking things out, and I always wear my fire department sweatshirts when I'm there. And I come up out of the creek, and I got my wading hip boots on and stuff, and I'm coming up out of the creek, and there was this old gentleman walking by. Man, he must have been 80 years old, and he was walking by, and he said, "What are you doing?" And his wife was with him. And I said, I'm just down here looking for footprints and stuff. And he looked at me and he's like, "What kind of footprints?" And I said, no reason to beat around the bush. I said, last year I saw 2 Bigfoots here, and I'd like to come back here and keep looking for evidence. And I saw him look at his wife, and I saw her look at him, and she said, "Go ahead, tell him." And he goes, "I've seen one down here." And I said, "Oh yeah?" I said, "Tell me about it." He said, I walk down here every morning, and he said it was just on the trail ahead of me about 30, 40 yards, and he said it turned and looked at me and then just walked off into the woods. And so this was coming from an old gentleman that walks in the park. And so I've actually talked to people in town. There's a restaurant there in town, and I was wearing my fire department shirt, and I'm sitting at the table, and the waiter, she goes, "Wow, you're a long ways from home." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Just outside of Kansas City." And she said, "Yeah." She said, "Wow, what are you doing here?" And me, I never shy away from telling people why I'm there. I said, "I'm here doing Bigfoot research back here in the park." And she said, "You need to talk to my boss." And I said, "Is he here?" And she said, "Yes, he's back there cooking." I said, "Well, when he gets a break, please have him come out here and talk with me." So he came out and sat at the table with me, and this is just right outside the park. I mean, it's on Main Street there in Sulphur. And he said when he was a boy, about 12 years old, riding through the park on a bicycle with a couple of his friends, he said there was something running along in the woods by Cold Creek Camp. and he said there was something running along in the woods beside him. He said it was about dusk, and he said he kept looking back, and when they crested the top of this hill, he said he stopped and looked back one last time, and he said something stepped out onto the road at the bottom of that hill behind him, and he said it was about our size. He said it was covered in hair. He said it was about our size. It was just a kid, a Bigfoot kid.
Wow.
And he said it scared us so bad. He said I never went back into that park again until he was a college student, and he said that he had camped there, since. And so I started talking to him about Bigfoot behavior and rock throwing and stuff like that. And he said rock throwing, and I said yeah. I said those are some of the things that they do. He said now we've had rocks thrown at us, and he said we just always think that somebody playing a trick on us. And I said, no. I said, if it's not somebody playing a trick on you, I said, that is certainly one of their behaviors. And he just stopped there for a minute. He said, wow. He said, we've had a lot of rocks thrown at us, and we just always assumed it was one of us, doing it, and nobody would fess up to it and those kind of things.
Right, right.
So these animals are there, and they interact with people in a lot of different ways, just not too many people pay attention.
Right, right. I think it's an interesting point here is this. You have what I would consider a remarkable experience, where you get a full-on view of one standing right next to your truck, literally, 10 feet away.
Yes.
And then at the same time, you're talking to people who are telling you stories that corroborate what you went through yourself, And I think that's interesting, and it puts it really into perspective, and it just tells how realistic the story is,
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of other incidental things. There was actually a newspaper report that I didn't read it myself. My friend was telling me about it. He said that a lady came out of one of the bathrooms and something bumped into her. It was in the middle of the night. She had to go to the restroom. She was in one of the little bathrooms there, and as she came out, something bumped into her and it spooked her. Anyway, so there was a newspaper article about it. So because of that, I was thinking, I bet these things will go into the bathrooms. So one of the times that I was there, I was there again by myself. I usually go in the cold months, only because of what happened to me in February. So I want to try to keep the scenario the same time of year, the same conditions. Me being the only one there certainly increases my chances of being the one visited if they're going to show up. So I was there, and nobody was there, no camp host, no nothing, and I'm exploring the bathrooms. The only bathrooms that are left unlocked in the off-season are just there at the bottoms, which is close to campsite 30. And so I'm checking the bathrooms out, and I was actually going up to all of the bathrooms, and I was looking around them. They've got a low overhang and would be very easy for something to snag themselves and leave hair on the gutterings and things like that. So that's where I'm exploring, trying to find any hairs that are caught around these bathrooms. So I'm in the lower bathrooms, and I'm going to the men's bathroom first, and I'm looking around, and I'm thinking that, if I was a Bigfoot or if they were in the bathroom, what would give them the most attention? And I would think their own reflection in the mirrors would probably give them. So I'm checking the mirrors out like crazy. I'm looking for fingerprints. I'm looking for lip prints. I'm looking for anything that would tell me that they've examined themselves in a mirror. And I didn't find anything, but as I'm getting ready to walk out of the men's bathroom, I look up, and there's 3 stalls in there, and they've got running water, but there's 3 stalls, and I look up at the turnbuckle on one of the stalls, and there was a coarse black hair way up at the ceiling, stuck in one of the turnbuckle knuckles of the stall where it attaches at the ceiling.
Right.
And I'm thinking, no way. How in the world could a person's hair possibly get up there? I had to stand on my tippy toes and reach way up there to pluck this hair out. And I think I knew what it was. I knew where the hair probably came from. Anyway, so I'm excited. I put it in a baggie, and I leave the bathroom, and I go around to the women's side, and I'm like, man, they go into these bathrooms where there's nobody here, or maybe they don't even there's people there. I don't know.
Sure.
So I'm going on the women's side, and I'm looking at turnbuckles now, and I'm checking out inside the stalls. I'm looking at the toilets. I'm checking out the mirror, and I didn't find anything on the women's side until I started to walk out. And right there on the door was this huge, dusty handprint. These doors have to be pushed out from the inside. Something with a dirty hand pushed that door open, and it looked like it had its hand closed, and you got these four big fingers and the palm pushing this door open, and it was all dusty. And it was much bigger than my fist could have made, and I thought to myself, a Bigfoot did that, because why would somebody come in with their hands so incredibly dirty and not rinse them off? There's a sink there with running water.
Sure.
So something came in there with dirty hands that they obviously, when I saw the Bigfoot come out of the woods, he obviously walked in a way that he could easily go to all fours. So I am a firm believer in the 4x4 mode. And so here's something with a dirty hand that pushed the door open and left his handprint. And I got a picture of it, too. So it's just incidental evidence, but it paints a big, broad picture about that park.
Right. Would you guess that the handprint was made relatively recent, or would you think it was there, had been there for a while?
It was recent from when I was there, because it was still dusty. I mean, it just, I can't imagine. If anybody else would have came in there and pushed the door open with their hip or their side or anything, it probably would have gotten, deteriorated or brushed apart or even changed the dynamics of that handprint. But it was pristine, so I knew that it was relatively fresh.
Right, sure. That's interesting. Now you've gathered up some great information, and you got some great audio clips. And I thought, if you don't mind, maybe we could play a few of them one at a time and discuss each one as we go. Would that be okay?
Sure. If you don't mind, if we could do the hoots first.
Sure.
Because when the Bigfoots were behind my truck, I recorded that whole night. Everything about that night I recorded. I had a recorder that had microcassette tapes. I had like 6 tapes, and I kept rotating these tapes because they were only like 15 minutes long. And so, this whole process took like 4 or 5 hours of this thing going through the park and everything that happened that night. And I'm sitting there in the dark. And so what happened was there was a lot of times I would pick up a tape and stick it in, not knowing if I'd reached the end of the other tape, and I overlapped the other tapes. Needless to say, the only thing that I was able really to save that was worth a damn was the Bigfoot hooting behind my truck 17 times. And we transferred some of that over into digital, and that's what you're about to hear is those digital hoot calls, and that is that Bigfoot behind my truck doing these calls.
All right, good job. That's the hoot. And I'll tell you what, I'm no expert on the linguistic of Bigfoot, but I can tell you that's no owl. And I don't know if and I'm sure you guys picked up on this, but about halfway through, there's a couple that you hear really, really far away, and I hope you can pick that up. But there's like a very distant response. What I think, anyway, is a response to these hoots. I don't know if did you hear that at all?
I never really listened for anything off in the distance.
Yeah, it's about halfway through that clip, and you hear the first one, and then and then you hear the real loud hoot again, and then again in the distance you hear that again. So I think that's really, really interesting. If you want, I can play that again if you'd like.
Well, I can't hear it much on my end.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay. Yeah, well, Dan's going to play that over that real quick, so we'll get a good audio on our audio here.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely want to listen to that because it's real faint and it's far away. But to me, it just sounds like it's a response to the hooting that he's doing. You know, so I found that one very interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
And you said,
well, you know,
go ahead.
What kind of time are we looking at?
We are about 45 minutes in, 43 minutes in, something like that.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to discuss Charles Hallmark's experiments in the park, which had an impact on what happened to me that night, and I didn't know it till later. I was at the fire department, and I heard about Charles Hallmark doing research in that park. So I called the man, and I talked to him on the phone. And he was very generous with his information. He was very courteous, and he was just a true gentleman. And we spoke on the phone, and I told him about when he was at the park. I didn't tell him about them hooting like owls or anything like that. But he told me that 2 years prior to me having a sighting there, he had been doing a baiting experiment in the off-season, which is the time I was there, in the parts of the park that were closed off in the off-season. He was baiting the trash cans, and he found out what kind of baits they liked, and he was trying to get fingerprints, and he found a way to get fingerprints, and he was getting some fingerprints, and he would take popcorn that you put in the microwave and make a popcorn bag, and he said he found out that they loved Fig Newtons. So he'd get a cup, a clean cup, and put it at the bottom of the trash can and put Fig Newtons in it, and on top of that, he would put the buttery bag of microwave popcorn. And he said they would have to at least remove the bag of popcorn, which would put butter on their fingers. And then when they grabbed the cup, he would get fingerprints. And so that was brilliant. And but it just goes to show you that 2 years later, they're still going through the park looking for his baits in those trash cans. That's what happened that night when I had my encounter. They were checking out the trash can because since that part of the park was closed off, nobody was putting trash in those trash cans and hadn't been for a while. So there should be no reason for there to be anything in those trash cans unless somebody was baiting them.
Sure. And or unless they were expecting something to be in there, you know. Like
right, which goes to show you you can trick them, and they can get used to a pattern of being baited. That's what happened that night. I just got lucky. I was there on a program that was already set up of them checking trash cans that Dr. Hallmark was leaving for them.
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if they're used to going to the can and opening up the can and finding goodies, then of course they would obviously keep going to the cans.
Right.
That's a great scenario. All right, let's move on to the next one here real quick. This one is called DWA0019, and it is just one quick yell. Okay,
this would be the whoop, and I'm going to go ahead and give people the scenario to this particular whoop. I was on Spencer Creek on Lake Oologah. We've been there for about 2 years. I've been going down there by myself. I've been staying by myself. A landowner was giving us permission on his property. He claimed to have seen them. He had hunting leases where hunters were claiming to see him, so he was giving me free access there, and I'd been going for quite a while. And I had my own sighting there on Spencer Creek. Just caught the back end of one running up out of the creek as I was worming my way through the creek. But I had a little box that I built on a trailer, a 4x6 trailer that I built, a little plywood box. And all I had was a night vision scope that I was putting into a hole on the side of this. And I would sleep in these boxes, and I could take them wherever I wanted to. If I could get a four-wheeler there or an ATV, then I could take the box there, and I would just stay in this box all night long. Well, anyways, I'm there on Spencer Creek this one night, and I started hearing off in the distance a whoop. It was a whoop, and I would hear another one at a different range, maybe a quarter mile away. I'd hear a whoop, and then I would hear one closer, whoop, and I thought it was a singular animal that was just making tracks. I was like, man, this thing is moving all over the place. But later I was told by another researcher in Oklahoma that those are locator calls. And I told him, I said, man, I heard it probably 20 or 30 times in that one night. And he said, well, there was probably multiple animals keeping track of each other, like maybe a hunting party or something like that that were keeping track of each other. And that's when my eyes got big, and I was like, wow, I thought it was one animal, but it was clearly more than one animal. And this is just one of it. I recorded all 20 or 30 that I heard that night, but this is just one of them.
Right. That's
and
that's an interesting sound.
It's got a low and a high tone to it, all within the same vocal.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was the assessment I was going to make. Was it sounds almost like it starts out human but ends totally different. You know.
It's definitely got two tones to it.
Yes. It's definitely distinct. That's for sure. We found that one interesting. That was one you said that you just took the one clip of a series of yelps. That's
right. Right.
All right. The next one we're going to listen to is called CAN vocal, and this is some kind of I don't know. There's a little bit of a growl at the end, and I just thought this was really cool, so I wanted to play this one. Do you know which one I'm referring to?
It was on a creek that we had a sighting at a week before, and I went down there, and I was on a creek bed, a rock creek bed, where I had a visitor visit me at about 3:00 in the morning. I hope you also have the creek crossing where he crosses the water, because that was a really good one. But anyways, that's this animal churning up rocks as it's crossing the water. But anyways, it spent about an hour at my campsite doing nothing but throwing rocks, and I did have a couple of vocals as part of that rock throwing display, and this is just one of them.
Okay. That little growl at the end really has me puzzled. You know, I think I told you before we started the interview, it sounded to me that it was almost like a Tasmanian devil. You know, just how you got sound.
It's almost like those are breaths, like a
Yeah, I can see that. I didn't think that before, but I can see where you're coming up with that. Yeah, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the one you just talked about the one through the creek, but I'll get that to Dan, and we'll add that at the end. And,
yeah. I mean, there's no way you can't put that one in there. You have to put that one in there because that thing was coming through the creek like a freight train, churning up rocks with its feet as it was moving.
Right. Yeah, I remember hearing it, but when I was going through the day and I was getting them, unfortunately, I guess that was for my mind. I apologize, but I will definitely get that one on there for you. We just won't listen to it in this segment here.
Right.
All right. But we'll definitely get that in. And all right.
Now, so the next one you've got is actually a series of rocks being thrown, correct?
Yeah. This
now, what I've got to tell the listeners, it started out where there was one rock being thrown by this thing in the water, and it was a rock that hit the ladder racks on my truck, and you could hear it go ping, and then hit the gravel on the ground, and it progressively got worse, where he was throwing more and more rocks. I'm assuming he was reaching into the water and picking up more rocks because I could actually hear him moving in the water. He would take a step and then throw another rock, but it culminated into this series of a lot of rock sounds. And Ed and I were talking, and there was only one creature there when I heard him moving through the water. There wasn't multiple creatures, so it was only one creature. But through this one particular series of rocks, there are so many sounds that it can't be that many rocks being thrown. It has to be rocks being held in his hands, and he has to be clacking them together, and then he throws a rock, and you hear it hit one of the logs by my campfire.
Absolutely, and I think of all the ones that I've heard, I think this is the one I like the most because that little series of clacks that you just referred to, because it kind of goes clack, 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 clack. You know, it's almost
It's too fast. It's too fast to have been thrown. It has to be rocks in his hand being clacked.
Correct. All right, so let's go ahead and play that one real quick.
And then that lone rock thrown that hits the piece of wood. Funk.
Yes. That was so those are the sounds that I collected, and I thought that they all deserved to be discussed, and you definitely did a very good job of documenting what you collected there. That's some awesome audio.
Okay, well, this is actually the sound that woke me up that night. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and all of the rock throwing the clips that you heard before, I was actually asleep when those happened. Those never woke me up. But what did wake me up was this thing crossing the water, and it was apparently when he was leaving. And it just sounds like this is waist-deep water. Well, for him it was probably thigh-deep water, crystal clear water with gravel, rocks on the bottom. And you can hear this thing wading through the water. But what's most distinct about it is you can hear the gravel being churned up under his footsteps, and it makes a distinct sound. And when you hear it, you're going to know that that's what it sounds like, something crossing the water on two legs, churning up the gravel as it wades through the water. What happened is I had gotten 2 books by Vance Orchard. One was called Walla Walla Bigfoot, and the other one was called Bigfoot of the Blues. And this was a gentleman who was a friend of Paul Freeman. And these were books about Paul Freeman and the decade that he spent researching in areas of the Blue Mountains. So I read these books, and knowing that I've seen the videos of Paul Freeman, I was very excited. And I took 2 weeks off and drove up to Walla Walla and mapped out these areas in the Blue Mountains that I wanted to spend some time in, and one of them was Black Snake Ridge. In the book, he talks about Paul and 2 other guys, Wes Summerlin, which was a tracker friend of his, and they actually got caught between a family unit of 3 Bigfoots up on Black Snake Ridge. They saw them, and they were tracking them, and they got caught in some in some wooded areas and got in between them somehow. And it was a very scary moment for them. But anyways, so I'm in this area of Black Snake Ridge where this happened, and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm driving up on some logging roads, and I'm up there, and this is way up in the mountains. I mean, you come off these logging roads, and you're going to tumble down for about 2,000 feet before you're dead and at the bottom. But anyways, so I'm getting tired. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got my thermal camera and everything, and I'm excited. I'm in a great area, but I'm really bushed at this moment. It's 2 o'clock. I'm tired. So I pull off into the woods, and I just kick my feet back, and I said, man, I got to get some sleep. I'm tired. So I just close my eyes and go to sleep. But the night before, this huge bug got splatted right over my steering wheel, right in the middle of my field of view as I'm trying to drive. It was almost the size of a hummingbird. It was so big. But there was a bug gut splat right on my windshield. So anyways, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I go ahead and just lean my feet back, and I start taking a nap. I mean, I'm tired. I just go to sleep. And I wake up about 7 o'clock in the morning. I only slept for just a few hours. And I open my eyes, and there in these bug guts was some hairs. I mean, there were hair, like an 8 or 10 inch long hair wasting in the wind. And I said, you got to be kidding me. So I get out with my camera, and I climb up on my hood, and I start taking pictures of this hair. At that point, I only saw one hair just in the bug gut. But when I look at the picture, I can see smaller hairs completely smashed into the bug gut. That tells me that it wasn't just a hair that got caught in the wind and floated into the bug gut, but there was something that leaned into my dash, into my windshield, and smashed those hairs into there because of those little hairs that were smashed into the bug gut, and you can clearly see that in those pictures.
Right. Yeah, and those pictures would be going across the top, and I've seen that, and I'm like, that is that's a very interesting. Now you collected that hair, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
Now, have you ever sent these hairs off to be analyzed, or?
I gave him. We have a biologist in the MABRC named Big Jim. He's a degreed biologist, and I gave them to him. You know, we don't want to spend the kind of money it takes that it would take to get any kind of DNA, because all you get is you spend your money, and all you get is an unknown. So, right. but I did give them to him so that he could just compare them to hairs, and he does a pretty good job of comparing them to hairs. And you know, and you know as well as I that we're convinced that they are what they are. They don't match anything else. They don't match raccoon. They don't match bear. They don't match whatever else you compare them to. But you know, without a body, all we can say is unknown.
Right. Now, there's a little difference in unknown and unknown primate, though. You know what I mean? If it's an unknown primate, then that would lead a lot of credence to, obviously, a primate running around in the woods here in North America, because other than human, I don't believe there is another primate other than Bigfoot in North America. So did he ever say it's a primate origin, or does he just say unknown?
We just compared them with known hairs, and they don't match.
Gotcha. Okay. That's good. I mean, that's still just as interesting as far as I'm concerned.
And, well, I got another interesting tidbit from my time up on Black Snake Ridge. I was sleeping in the back of my truck, but what I did was I parked my truck and I went walking. But before I went walking, I left my parabolic sitting on top of my truck in a recorder. And my truck is in the woods, and I just take off walking down the road. And I probably go maybe 3/4 of a mile, and I'm just kind of looking around, and then I start heading back to my truck. But it takes me a good long time because I'm kind of exploring, I'm looking around, and I finally get back to my truck, and I start listening to the recording from the time that I left my truck. And so I start listening, and you can hear my footfalls leaving down the gravel road or down the dirt road, the logging road. You hear me walking away, and then there's nothing but silence, and the sounds of nature. And then maybe 10 minutes later, you hear a wood knock. Pow. And then I hear a response in the distance. Pow. And that's after I had left. And so that's why I like recording and I like parabolics, because you hear things that are relevant to their behavior. You wouldn't pick that up without a parabolic, and I was gone, so it only happened around my truck. But there was something watching my truck after I had left, and they responded to each other by doing a tree knock.
Wow. That's cool. That's really cool. Now, I know you've got some great pictures, and great audio that we've already listened to. But what other evidence have you collected besides what we've talked about so far? And if you don't mind going through a couple other things. I know you told me a little story a minute ago, or before we started tonight, that I thought was pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, footprints.
No, I think this was the bite mark you found on the tampon.
Oh yeah. I
found this really interesting. I mean, I really did. It sounds awesome, but it's interesting.
Yes. This is all in a wooded area outside of one of the bathrooms at the Chickasaw Park. And I found this. It was just white. It was a white piece of cotton that was in the brush, on the ground, in some thick brush outside of one of the bathrooms. And so I got down in there and I picked it up, and it had a string attached to it, and I pulled it up and I looked at it, and it was only a part of a tampon that still had the string, but it was spread out, and it had a half moon incisor bite where something had bitten it, and you could see that it was a half round arc where something had bitten it, and that was all that was left was the white cotton and the string, and then there was bite mark where it was completely cut with a bite. And I showed it to Darren, and we were like, wow, something. I mean, I don't know if it was a used tampon or if it was a clean tampon. What was left was clean.
Right.
So I just don't know if maybe somebody had left one or what, but something tasted it and did it, and that was what was left there.
And I think it's important that I explain to the audience that I realize it sounds gross, and I'm not making light of that, of what it was. The point is, it expresses what kind of senses they have, that they can pick up on that human scent from what was probably, anyway, at least deep inside a garbage can,
Right. And maybe it didn't like it. Maybe it didn't like it, but it, just like anything, it had to test it and taste it. And,
sure.
And that's what was left.
Right. Now, you didn't find that in the bathroom, though, right? You found that actually in the woods near the bathroom.
It was in the woods on the ground.
Right. So someone threw one on the ground, I guess, which is very possible at campgrounds. But unless that's what happened, it's most likely that someone took it out of the garbage can. Something took it out of the garbage can and took it into the woods just to investigate it. So that was
right.
I just find that really interesting. And I again, I don't mean to make light of it. I'm not trying to make a joke out of it. I just find that interesting.
Yes, and that's what it appeared to me.
Sure. I want to change gears here for just a second because you're a seasoned veteran at this. You've been doing this for a long time. You've collected some great evidence. But as a seasoned researcher, what advice would you offer to someone new to researching and who wanted to go out and collect evidence? What advice would you give them? Well,
I get asked that myself all the time. Being part of the MABRC, and a lot of new people join up all the time, and they ask, I'm new, I don't have a whole lot of money. What's the best piece of equipment that I can purchase that I can be a researcher? And I can say hands down, the first piece of equipment that you need. I'm not even saying a camera is important or anything is important, but the most important thing to me is a parabolic, because you will hardly ever see these creatures, but you can hear them. They will come around, and they're going to stay at a distance when they're checking you out, and you can't see them because they have a way to peer through the woods at a distance and to see what's going on, and you will never see that, but you can hear it. You can hear them, and you can hear them walking, and you can hear them snapping twigs, and you can hear them breaking branches. But they only do this 100 yards out, and they probably won't come any closer at times. But you have to be able to hear them if you want to know when they're around. So I say get a parabolic with a headset and just spend a lot of time just sitting quietly at your campsite reading, because then you're not moving, because even your own movements will completely drown out the sounds that you're hearing in a parabolic. You have to be still and quiet. And the only way to do that for an extended period of time is to read while you're listening with your parabolic. But if you're paying attention, you will hear them.
That's good advice. That's real good advice. And it's funny because I watched a video where you had done a speech for, I guess your encounters, and you talked about the mic, and you said, I just thought this was funny. You said you could hear an ant cough from 300 yards, and I thought that was clever. That makes a strong point of how good this piece of equipment is and how important it can be.
Yeah, but I don't think I said an ant cough. I said a gnat fart. You could hear a gnat fart at 100 yards.
I was trying to clean it up, Randy.
I know.
I'm just kidding. No, but it does. It kind of goes into how important this piece of equipment can be, and obviously you've already shown that with this audio that we've played tonight already. It's it's amazing audio. It's great audio. But now, what is the name of your research organization, and how can someone follow the work that you're doing?
I joined. Well, actually, Darren calls me a co-founder because I was there at the very beginning with Darren. Darren is DW. He's known as DW Lee, Darkwing on all the forums. But he had a website or a forum called Green Country Bigfoot Research way back, and I heard that he had put my audio on there, but he had some of the information wrong. So I called him up, and I said, hey, man, I appreciate you playing my audio and what happened to me that night. I said, but I need to correct the information. And it was that conversation that he and I had that began our friendship, and he changed it to Mid-America Bigfoot Research, which is MABRC, and it's grown ever since. And it's pretty much a researcher's forum. It's for researchers to discuss with other researchers and put your information and your investigations and your evidence out there for us to scrutinize and look at and to evaluate and to discuss amongst ourselves. But it's basically a researcher's forum, and we invite anybody and everybody to come there, and there's a lot of researchers there that lay out their evidence.
Sure. And that was the MABRO?
MABRC. It's called Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center.
Gotcha. Okay, I was glad we got that cleared up. So make sure everybody, all the listeners, make sure you go check that out. And that's a forum that's online. It's not in the groups on Facebook. This is a forum that they have separate from the Facebook communities, correct?
That is correct. Even though we are on the Facebook, too. We have state Facebook, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma. We are on Facebook, but it's not the same. You need to join up on the forum if you really want to see what's going on.
Sure, and I did, as a matter of fact. I did. I joined last night, or the night before, one or the other, and I found some great stuff on there. It's very interesting, and I would definitely highly recommend any of the listeners to go to that MABRC and check that out, because it's really interesting.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad you joined up, and that's really the only way that you could access all my stuff, because I'm technologically ignorant, and I couldn't have gotten to you the stuff that you put on this show, so you had to join just so you could get it for me.
Right. Well, don't feel bad. I'm not real tech savvy myself, but we got it together, and I think we put together a pretty good little list there, and that's a very small list, by the way. What I played here tonight was a very small portion of what Randy has, and it's important to get his stuff out there, and I definitely urge everybody to go check it out, because it's really good stuff.
Cool.
So what are you and your team working on now? What are you guys doing now at the moment?
Well, one of the areas that we're concentrating on is where I've gotten the creek encounter, where the thing was throwing rocks and crossing the creek while I was there. That is one long creek that is northeast of Stillwell, Oklahoma. And Stillwell is where we have a yearly conference. The MABRC sponsors a conference there, and we put on presentations like the presentation that you saw that I had done down in Honubby. We have researchers do presentations, and they showcase what they have done throughout the year. And we've got some guys that have gotten some thermal pictures and some pictures from some locations, and they will be putting on a presentation this year in October at Stillwell, and I'm looking forward to it. And I did a presentation this last year, and I like doing presentations. I don't like to do them unless I have something new to show, but we got lots of stuff that we can show, and it turns out to be a pretty big deal. And that's the area that we've been concentrating on is in the Ozark National Forest, which is just on the western edge of the Ozarks that come out of Arkansas and goes into Oklahoma, and that's the area that we're concentrating on right now.
Good deal. Well, I mean, I can tell you I appreciate the fact that you're willing to be so detailed about your locations, because a lot of researchers aren't,
Right.
And I appreciate you being so forthright.
Well, we invite people out there. We've had people come out there and they've had some of their first sightings in some of our areas. That's why we like to be open, because we want you to know that these creatures are there, and we're trying to document it. We're trying to get the evidence, and we don't mind you coming along and having a sighting of your own.
Good deal. Well, Randy, this is the part of the show where I give you an opportunity to cover anything that maybe we forgot or something maybe I didn't mention or something you want to throw out there yourself. But I generally let the guests close the show out. So the floor is yours.
Well, I just met you because of some posts that I had put on Bigfoot Believers on Facebook, and I appreciate getting to know you. I know you've interviewed other people, and I enjoyed chatting with you and your buddy. And there's a lot of humble people out there that are gathering information, and what we try to do is we're just going to put it all together and get those patterns down and try to make it to where just the average person can go out, by knowing the patterns of their behavior, increase their chances of having a sighting.
Sure. And I think you make a good point there, because I think it's real important, and that's one of the reasons we even do this, is because we want people to work together and form smaller communities to get together and go out and get that good information. It's so hard to do it alone, but together, you can cover so much more ground. You can collect evidence, research together, and that's what it's all about, working together.
Yep, you can make good friends too.
Absolutely. And Randy, I consider you a friend now, and I hope that after we're done, we can keep in touch, and I'd love to see how more of your research is going. Feel free to let me know when you get something more.
All right, brother, that'll work.
Randy, I appreciate you coming on the show, and if any time you have any questions or anything I can do for you, you feel free to let me know.
All right, I look forward to talking to you, man.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.